tell me again how you found that wonderful man. He's such a gentle soul.
I know.
He's so knowledgeable and such a great delivery mechanism for all that information because he's just like, I don't know if humble's the word. He's just, uh, I mean, he doesn't put off that I know something you don't know vibe. You know what I mean?
I know because you can look at his bio and be very intimidated. But then when you get to speak with him, and everybody will see this on the podcast, he's just such a gentle, loving soul and passionate about what he's doing.
Yeah. Yeah, and anybody listening, any nurse listening to this, I mean, it kind of it really runs the gamut. We go specific into the science of hyperbaric therapy and augmenting the therapies with integrative approaches and stuff like that. But then we're also very nebulous in it and talking about the foundations of health. And we've done that a lot lately, where the people we've been interviewing have an expertise in like a high level of expertise in a certain area. They're
Right.
pioneers in their field, but they all seem to go back to this fundamental, your beliefs, your attitudes, your perspective on life, and how that is fundamental to any of this stuff working. Because it's like I love the leaky bucket metaphor. I haven't used it in a long time. I can't remember if we talked about it in the podcast, but it's like if your health is a bucket and there's a leak in it, you can fill it with, you know, meditation and supplementation and pharmaceuticals and even taking a vacation and, you know, exercise and all this stuff. But if there's a leak in your bucket, like the fundamental way that you look at life, and if that way you look at life creates a hypervigilance of any kind, you're, you know, people pleasing or symptoms, if you're always on red alert for things that go wrong in your body and stuff like that. The dirty secret is the downstream oxidative stress of that hypervigilance. It can kind of, you know, your bucket's still leaking.
Right.
But the cool thing is, if you plug the leaks, then the bucket is kind of self-filling. And I think that's like a running theme. So anybody listening to this podcast is going to get a lot of science and get a lot of nitty-gritty and the biochemistry and all that kind of stuff, but also the important nebulous things as well.
Totally. And what they'll learn from his podcast too, right? So that's the other thing. Not only are you going to learn from him in our interview with him, but the people he's talking to and the conversations they're having and the topics and the things that they're covering brings such valuable information to our nurses. So we're really excited to bring Smarter Not Harder podcast in as one of the partner podclasses too.
Right. So after listening to this podcast, nurses go over to RNegade.pro. Did I say that right? RNegade.pro. If you're not registered already, it's a really simple process. Your name, your email, your nursing license number, so that we can get you your certificate. You take listen to the podcast, you do a simple quiz, little evaluation, and you can get your CE credit for learning from Scott Sherr. Please enjoy.
Rolling.
Renegades.
Andre and I had this big idea. Mind blowing.
I had to have the people who didn't believe in me.
Between one day and the next, everything changed.
Nurses know how to solve shit.
Renegades. I've heard so much about you from Wendy. You're like cotton candy for my brain, and I can't wait to learn from you.
It's exciting to be here. Thank you for having me.
Well, you're so welcome. So why don't you just start out telling us basically how you got here with us? Like, who are you? Where are you from? Were you always interested in medicine? How'd you get to where you're at? You know, just like the generic stuff.
Sure, I can do that. So I'm a board certified internal medicine physician. I've been now out of training for a long time. I did it in the early 2000s, from 2003 to 2010 in the University of Maryland in Baltimore. As an internal medicine physician, my residency was at the University of Maryland. I went to medical school there as well. But since a kid, I've been interested in medicine. My father's a chiropractor for 45 years on Long Island in New York.
Ooh.
And so I grew up in his practice. I grew up, with the framework of a very alternative way of looking at health, actually. Decided to go to medical school with the kind of high-minded idea that I could bridge the gap between the chasm between alternative
Yeah.
and conventional medicine. I didn't really know anything existed outside of alternative medicine until I went to medical school, interestingly enough. And so I kind of
Interesting.
got thrown into the fire, as you can imagine, when I first started. And through that time, through medical school, through residency, I kind of knew I wanted to get out as fast as I could, find the easiest route. And so that's why I did internal medicine. When I was in medical school, I learned about hyperbaric oxygen therapy, and I got very interested in learning how to utilize hyperbaric therapy from an integrative context. And I've been involved in hyperbaric medicine now for the last decade or so. And I have my own clinical practice that's focused on helping people understand how to use hyperbaric medicine in their own practice, and at the same time, how they can use it in an integrative way. And from that aspect of my practice, I got more involved in a nonprofit organization called Health Optimization Medicine and Practice. That was is a nonprofit organization that trains practitioners on how to optimize health rather than treat disease. And that was founded by a friend, a mentor, and a colleague named Dr. Ted Achacoso. And Dr. Ted created this framework that he was using in clinical practice, and we now use as a way to teach other practitioners on how to optimize the health of their patients using a different perspective. So that's the foundation of what I do now. And then my clinical practice is mostly via telemedicine outside of Boulder, Colorado, I guess.
Nice.
Just out of curiosity, what did it look like that you were always interested in medicine as a kid?
I grew up in his practice. I grew up seeing how he could really shift people's health by changing their spinal alignment, but also changing their diet, their lifestyle. So I saw him taking people off of dairy when I was a kid, and their allergies and their asthma would go away. This is directly why I was lactose intolerant for many years of my life as well, because dairy wasn't a part of my life when I was a kid up until I was 8 or 9, and I wanted to have ice cream for the first time, and that didn't go well overall. So as you can imagine. So my father, Alan is his first name. He's always been very much on the cutting edge and kind of like the OG, functional medicine doctor in the community, seeing everybody and kind of helping them out in various ways. And I really enjoyed seeing the fruits of what he was doing. The patients loved him. The patients enjoyed being in his office. I mean, I went from coloring in the front to collecting money at the front desk when I was in high school.
Yeah.
So I did the whole kind of gamut there, and I really enjoyed the science of it. I enjoyed anatomy and physiology when I was in high school and took some classes there. So I kind of knew I always wanted to do the doctoring thing, and how I was going to do that evolved. And at first I wanted to be a chiropractor, but then I realized, actually with conversations with my father at the time, that chiropractors were very limited as far as what they could do.
Right.
And he wanted me to have all the leeway of being an MD, and then kind of figuring it out from there. And that's kind of what I've done over the years. So
Yeah, you just answered my next question, because I would think that growing up with actually observing your father and having your father as kind of a mentor, and probably hearing a lot about the limitations of the allopathic model. I was curious why you didn't just follow in his footsteps, but that is
yeah, he used to say that you can become an MD and then you can do anything you want. And he's wrong, actually. No. It's better if you have no license at all, because then you can do whatever you want and you can't get anything taken away from you.
Can't get any trouble. Can't get sued.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But he was right in the respect that when I learned about hyperbaric medicine, for example, there were very few people that were doing hyperbaric medicine that didn't have gray hair. And I was a 33-year-old learning hyperbaric medicine. And so having the MD got me in the door very quickly in a field that was very niche at the time. It's not as niche as it used to be. And so creating a practice around that became relatively fast, although I would say relatively fast because I also have 4 children and a wife who's also a physician. And so, maintaining ends meeting for long periods of time, and, the graduation out of the hospital has been a slow one for me, but it has happened, which has been very nice. So.
Well, was there a moment as you were going through medical school? So you had the experience and the mentorship and the experience of growing up with your father's practice, and then going to medical school. Was there a moment that kind of made everything different from one day to the next, that bridged that gap for you and kind of set you on the trajectory that you're on now? Or was it just kind of an evolution?
Well,
That's what
it was more getting tantalized by the provocative nature of certain salaries when you finished medical school and residency. Like, oh, I could be a dermatologist and make $800,000 a year. I could be a gastroenterologist and I could make X, or I could be a radiologist, you fill in the blank. But I always came back to trying to remember why I went to medical school in the first place, which was to try to bridge that gap and find a way to help people and do it in a holistic way in some way, shape, or form. So I thought about doing those other things and almost got derailed a couple times. But in the end, I really felt that my mission or my passion or whatever was going to be finding a way to bridge those gaps. And that's what I've done over the years really is create an integrative practice that has a foundation, which is called health optimization medicine, and it has a additional specialty in hyperbaric medicine as well. But I like to call myself really a conductor of all things health optimization at this point, given what I've been doing for such a long time and the networks that I've created and the people that I work with, whether it's in the nonprofit, in our for-profit company that sells products as well, that helps support the nonprofit, and my own life, my own family, and all those kinds of things. So,
what took you down the path of hyperbaric medicine? Like, what drew you there?
A couple things. I worked at a trauma center in Baltimore, and there's a lot of trauma in Baltimore. And so they have a very large hyperbaric facility down in the basement. And so I got to see some pretty amazing recoveries using this gigantic submarine looking thing, because that's the kind of chamber it was. It's called the multi-place chamber. So I got to see that kind of in real time. And interestingly enough, my father at the same time was getting involved in hyperbaric medicine from an alternative perspective, using it in kids with autistic spectrum, for example, and seeing really significant benefit when they were doing it in an integrative, holistic kind of context. Holistic's a very old word. We don't use that word anymore, really. So it's more like integrative is the word I typically use, but that's the kind of frame I saw. I saw it from the emergency acute side, and I saw it what could happen potentially on the alternative side. And then I kind of went in a deep dive into the history, into the physiology, into how it was being used around the world. And I realized that it's a fantastic technology. And the other benefit, and I was kind of alluding to this earlier, is that not many people knew about it. So I could learn a lot quickly and be, a quote unquote expert in the field very quickly because nobody else knew a whole lot about it. And I kind of hit it at a relatively early time. This is back in 2000, what is it? 10, 11, 12, that time frame when I was learning a lot about it. And now you fast forward 10 years plus, like many people know about hyperbaric therapy.
Sure.
Very few people knew about it at the time. So it's been a cool journey overall, but I learned very quickly, in addition, that although hyperbaric medicine was a fantastic technology and the ability to accelerate healing, recovery, decrease inflammation, if you didn't do it in an integrative context, you're often missing a significant proportion of how you could help people. Because if you're sick for a long period of time, there's a good chance that your ability to make energy is not awesome. And that could mean that you're not able to use the machinery that are required in the mitochondria to help you make energy, or you have a hard time with the detoxification processes that are involved in making energy. And so in a hyperbaric chamber, you're flooding the system with a lot more oxygen, 800%, 1200% more oxygen. So what's that oxygen going to do if you don't have the machinery to really make energy effectively? And that means you're not going to feel well when you go into a hyperbaric chamber, especially in a deeper pressure kind of environment. And so I got burned in the beginning because people would want to come in with severe chronic illnesses, and I would find them they would get worse in the chamber. Sometimes they would eventually get a little bit better, but oftentimes they wouldn't stay better. They would often recur with symptoms, recur issues. But when I started optimizing them ahead of time, optimizing their vitamins, minerals, and cofactors that were responsible for energy production, detoxification, optimizing their gut, their neurotransmitters, their vitamins, minerals, and nutrients and cofactors otherwise, their diet, their lifestyle, and then take 3 or 6 months and then start hyperbaric therapy. It was like a 180-degree turn as far as how well people were doing. And so that's what my clinical practice now is people will talk to me all the time or find a lot of the work that I've done on hyperbaric therapy over the years. And they say, hey, doc, can my hyperbaric therapy help with my migraines? And then 90% of my conversation with them has nothing to do with hyperbaric therapy at all. It has to do with foundational approach to health that we do at the nonprofit and that I do in my clinical practice.
It's hearing you speak. It's like the first chasm that you identified was between allopathic and integrative. And then even in the integrative space, there's multiple chasms too, because it's like the hammer nail thing.
Yep.
One model uses pharmaceuticals, hammer nail, like there's integrative and functional, like the MTHFR pathway. Have you ever seen that the biochemical pathway of the body? It reminds me of that the photo of the Milky Way and that arrow that points at the Earth, and it's just this tiny speck, whatever.
Yeah.
And if you look at the biochemical pathway of the body, there's a picture of that, and the MTHFR pathway is like right here. And you zoom out, and it's like, well, it can't be just that. Like,
of course. Yeah.
And if you don't do all of the, it's like you need the 10,000 keys to open the one door. And you just kept identifying chasm here, chasm there. And there's only one way to do it. You have to support the body in the whole pathway.
Yeah. Intuitively, I've known this since I was a kid, because it wasn't just like my father was just adjusting people and saying goodbye. It was adjusting diet, lifestyle, behavior, supplementation, all of those things together. And so what I've realized over the years, intuitively then, and now more cognitively as well, is that everything's in a network. You can't just move one node without moving many, many others in the whole process. And so when I met Dr. Ted Achacoso, who's the founder of Health Optimization Medicine and Practice, he was really operationalizing a data-focused approach to a network-wide range shifting idea, which what I mean by that is that when you're shifting a node in a network, you want to shift all of the nodes, or as many nodes as you can. And when you shift them, really what we're trying to do in health optimization medicine is shift all those networks to when you were 21 to 30 years of age. So not just optimized for your age, but optimized for when we are optimized as human meat suit organisms themselves, right? Which is when we're 21 to 30, resilient, procreation, everything that, you're really, that's most of us that are, that are listening to this and remember, like, that's when you can do most anything. I always got hangovers, to be honest. I could never not get a hangover. Some people didn't get hangovers in their 20s. I envy you. But for me, that was always a problem. But in essence, what we're doing at Health Optimization Medicine is shifting all of those nutrient gut hormone networks back to when you were 21 to 30 years of age. And that is a process. It's not something that happens overnight, of course. And so 6 months, a year, longer, and it's not something that ever ends. It's always a journey, like life or whatever, right? So through the whole process, we're optimizing that foundation, using those networks, understanding those networks, and rebooting the system. So we often say we're not a longevity company, we're a health span company. We care about how many healthy years that we have here, rather than looking at how long you live. As if you ever get a wish for eternal life, make sure you also get another wish for eternal youth at the same time, or else things may not go well. So
no joke. When you look at, so my experience with hyperbaric therapy, I can't even say medicine, was really around performance. It was mostly becoming popular, elevating athletic performance.
Sure.
So, and in thinking about what you were saying before, for people, if you put them right in the hyperbaric, breathing, how people breathe, because that's how we always approached it. My husband's a breath coach and works with athletes. They don't breathe properly either. So when they're in that hyperbaric chamber, I'm sure you're seeing a total disruption too, from breath rates and patterns, depending on how they're breathing with that much oxygen as well too, right?
I have a healthy respect for breath, as you can imagine. And not only the oxygen portion, but actually the carbon dioxide, the carbon dioxide portion as well. And I did a podcast actually on our network called the Smarter Not Harder podcast with a guy named Brian McKenzie. And Brian is a breath expert. You know Brian's work. And so he's all about CO2 tolerance. And he finally convinced me that CO2 is not a waste product.
Right.
Wow.
It's not something we just breathe out. It's a signaling molecule. More CO2 is going to cause vasodilation. It's going to get more oxygen to tissue, actually.
Yes.
So when I think about hyperbaric protocols, one of the things I'm always emphasizing to people is their breath. And you never want to hold your breath in a chamber. Let's be clear.
Right.
But you don't want to have your shallow breathing patterns. You want to make sure you're recruiting your lungs and getting good oxygen delivery to your capillaries in your lungs, and also getting good CO2 release as well from your lungs as well. So hyperventilation is never a good idea, is what it comes down to. Like in a hyperbaric chamber, if you hyperventilate, you're not going to allow that oxygen to peel off your hemoglobin and get to your tissues. Yeah. And so, what's the point, right? Or you're getting less of the oxygen benefits of being in a chamber. So, short story. I'm a big fan of the breath,
breathing
to control and to optimize. We all breathe, but most of us are breathing on a day-to-day basis.
Oh, geez, the two of you are making me feel insecure. I mean, Wendy's husband invented breathing, I think. And
oh, really? Nice. We'll need to talk then. I'd love to hear more. Yeah.
I was thinking of too. I'm sure you know Gary Brecka. I follow him, and he just got some really cool-looking hyperbaric chamber. Did you see that?
Yeah, that video was sent over to me. I did appreciate that he was very clear about the supervision requirements and the safety requirements associated with it. But I've used hyperbaric therapy in home, hard chambers, soft chambers, different types of pressures, for any condition you can imagine, really. But I use a lot of it. I have a lot of athletes that use chambers regularly from a performance perspective, from a recovery perspective. You decrease inflammation in the chamber, you make new blood vessels, you create new stem cells, or you mobilize new stem cells to areas where they're required. You improve lymphatic flow, immune system optimization, I should say. You improve wound healing. I mean, in essence, what hyperbaric therapy is a wound healer. Anything that's required for healing wounds, hyperbaric therapy is going to help you do that, whether it's an acute issue or a long-term issue. However, and this is what it comes back to, is that if you don't have the machinery to be able to create that response to hyperbaric therapy, you're not going to see the benefits. And so I often emphasize, and I've gotten in trouble in the hyperbaric community for this, is waiting to go into a chamber. Like you were saying, Karen, if you have a hammer, everybody, you have a nail, whatever, the hammer nail thing, right? Yeah. And so I often say, wait 3 or 6 months if it's not an acute issue. Optimize mitochondrial function, the gut, shift all those nutrient and hormone and other networks back to when you were 21 and 30 years of age as much as you can. If you can't do it initially, at least do it concurrently, but better to do it initially. And then revisit whether hyperbaric therapy is the right thing to do. And I've had a lot more success over the years doing that. And as you can imagine, there's lots of other tools and tricks and technologies and supplements and other things that I can use along the way. But in essence, that's my framework.
It seems like a pretty responsible approach.
Well, I'm with all of your knowledge. So like all of these tools in your toolbox and having to be, obviously you're very knowledgeable and have it easily accessible in your brain. How much do you use intuition? Like if you have like 10,000 things that you can do, how do you choose which one is right for which person? And do you have a certain methodology or do you kind of lead with intuition?
You're both nurses, right?
Karen is, I'm not.
She plays one on TV.
I play one.
Play on TV. Okay,
I think I am.
I would ask you the same question, Karen. Like when you're seeing somebody at the bedside, you have a framework in mind. You know what the ideas are that you're going to be doing for that patient that particular day or that particular encounter, as it were. But so much of this is just feel from just seeing so many people over the years and knowing kind of where people are and where you can see, like, as when you're first coming out of practice or first coming out of training, you can maybe see like 1 step ahead, 2 steps ahead kind of thing. That's it. As you get more experience and then you get a better sense, you can think 5, 10, maybe sometimes as many as 12, 20 steps ahead sometimes in people, understanding what their path is going to be, very likely going to be. Now, you don't know exactly what that's going to be, but you get a sense of that very quickly. So intuition's a big part of it. And this is just clinical practice over many years. Mm-hmm. And I grew up with a father that was very intuitive. And so he would know within about 30 seconds to a minute what to do most of the time. And so a good clinicians overall, over long periods of time in practice, that's really as long as it takes for the most part to kind of get a good sense of where people are and where you can take them and how long it's going to take you to get them places where you think they need to go or where they want to go. So I'm very clear with people when I first meet them, for example, if I know that no that I'm not going to be able to help them, right? And I know that oftentimes that often becomes a psychosocial emotional thing, for example, right? So I know that no matter how much hyperbaric therapy I give this person, no matter how many supplements I give them, no matter how much dietary changes I give them, nothing's going to move until they move physiology as a result of psychology, right? And that's a big component of things overall. And that's something that I've become a lot more clear about with people when I talk to them over the years, is that I don't just do things just to do them anymore. I do them because I know, or I have a good sense that they're going to help. And if I know that whatever I'm going to do is not going to work, very likely, then I will tell them that and be clear that it's not just in their head per se, but there's psychological aspects of things that need to be addressed before anything's going to move physically. And you can do certain things physically, like you can help people move better, you can help exercise, and like certainly there's things you can do physically to help shift psychology, but oftentimes it's not going to be enough until you address the psychology. So that's something I've become a lot more clear about over the years.
This is my wheelhouse, that psychoneuroimmunological thing. My whole world changed. Well, I had my own experience. I call it my surrendered in a puddle of snot and tears moment. I had chronic fatigue syndrome, chronic Lyme disease, yeast overgrowth, blah, 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 blah. And then my brain fog had gotten so bad that it was like early onset dementia. Like I would lose the ends of moments. I was 37 years old. I was learning about neuroadrenal testing analysis, supplementation, whatever. And my mentor, who was I was my first client, got my test back and he's like, "You're faking it." And I'm like, "What do you mean I'm faking it?" He's like, "Well, you come up as this, all go, no quit, never let them see you sweat, all American." And I see clients with tests that are 50% better than yours, and they're catatonically depressed and they can't get out of bed and they can't experience pleasure or whatever. And he's like, "What's going on?" And I saw how I'd been living my life in this hyper vigilant, what people think of me kind of thing like that. That was creating this. What was going on up here was creating massive amounts of inflammation in my body.
Mm-hmm.
And I had this fuck it moment. Like I was certain that if I stopped doing what I was doing my whole life, everybody was going to leave me. I was going to get, my parents would disown me. My kids wouldn't like me anymore. I'd have no friends. I'd be alone. And it was in that moment, like, oh, well, I'm just going to be alone because I can't do this. 3 weeks later, all of my symptoms were gone. And eventually I started going down the psych, and I learned about the cell danger response and the three things that make us sick, the microbial, the environmental, and the psychological. And the psychological is a linchpin because our immune systems can clear out toxins. They're very good at getting rid of bugs and stuff like that. We can heal from blunt force trauma, but the psychology and overactive psychology and an identification with being sick also.
Yes, that's a big one. Yeah.
Will create the inflammation. Well, so if you don't have this, so I love that I love that you pointed that out and that you'll actually say, how do you know when to say, I can't help you?
Yeah. I mean, it's not like I just say, I can't help you. It's more like, let's have the conversation. Let's see where we are. Let's see what you've been through so far. And then I will do the nuanced conversation oftentimes. Are they ready? I'm from New York. I could be very, very blunt if I want to be, but in general, I'm not. I try to be more nuanced and subtle and like, look, this is my experience. This is what I've seen. And the big part that I always go to here is sometimes I won't say it's in your head. What I will say is that you have sympathetic overactivation. You are in fight or flight all the time, just like you were describing just there, Karen, right? And I love that you mentioned the cell danger response. We have the Home Hope. It's called Health Optimization Medicine in Practice. We use Home Hope as the short for that. We have a module on evolutionary medicine, and one of the big pieces on that is the cell danger response. And so we go through that in detail with practitioners that are learning how to understand evolutionary medicine. And evolutionary medicine is a very amazing topic overall. If people are interested, there's a great book by a guy named Randolph Nesse that's called Why We Get Sick. And it's fantastic. It gives you a sense of why do we get fevers? Like, why do we get depressed? Why do we get other emotional issues? Like, these are all evolutionary in various ways, right? And you get a sense of why things are happening overall. But we go through the cell danger response, and the stress piece of that is huge. And so one of the big things that we emphasize in that course, and also And the products that we make in a company called Transcriptions that supports the health optimization medicine nonprofit is working on the parasympathetic nervous system. So what I'll often do in patients or in people that are talking to me that are very fight or flight driven is that, what I'll say is like, look, what we can do is start working on your parasympathetic activation. We can work on your vagal nerve. Vagal nerve, as we all know, is our way to help optimize our parasympathetic response. And so I will work with people on that aspect, but I will not start giving them supplements and putting them in a hyperbaric chamber. And then sometimes I'll give supplements, but they'll be more focused on like that parasympathetic side of things, right? And then eventually, but usually in the beginning, I'm very patient. I will say, like, we're going to start working on parasympathetic activation, but this is under the guise of working on the psychosocial, emotional, neurophysiology of what's going on, so that you can start working on that, and then everything else is going to get easier. That's how I see it.
So if you're a nurse, what's the feeling you associate with going to the mailbox and seeing that notification that says your license is up for renewal in 90 days? Do you go, yes? Or, oh, right? Why? I mean, it's not like they're hard to get. You have 2 years and there's so much free stuff out there. And yet we drag ourselves across the finish line, kicking and screaming, because they suck. They're boring and antiquated, and the delivery mechanism is inconvenient. And the thing is, if you're a nurse, we love to learn. We're always listening to podcasts and audiobooks and YouTube videos because we're just curious. But we have to pick through this pile of crap so that we can remain a nurse. Well, we created RNegade.pro to change that. We wanted nurses to be able to get credit for the stuff that they're naturally inclined to do anyway. It starts with a podcast. And then we're creating courses, and we want everything we do to feel like what you're naturally doing. The research shows that that's how we learn and retain best. Check it out. Pick one. See what you think. So maybe when you go to the mailbox next time and get that notification, you'll have that, yes, because they're already done.
Listening to you guys about the cell danger term, isn't that kind of the basis for epigenetics? Yes?
So, I mean, epigenetics is the study of, thumbs up there. Epigenetics is a science that focuses on the expression of our genes, and the expression of our genes changes depending on environmental stimuli. So the things that, Karen was mentioning, of course, in our environment are causing the expression of our genes to change depending on the situation. That could be physical. It could be a physical stress. It can be an emotional stress. It can be heat stress. It could be cold stress. It could be any kind of stress. And that doesn't mean, all stresses aren't bad, of course, right? There's eustress, which is like exercise, for example, or going into a sauna. And then there's distress, which is stress that's not good for us. The stress can be acute. It could be like trauma, or it can be, stress that doesn't go away because we have continued anxiety related to something, right? So all of these do affect our epigenetics. They do affect the expression of our genes. And we have another module that's very specific on teaching people, clinicians, on how to understand epigenetics. And we have a very prominent researcher that helped write that part of the course. Her name is Lucia Aronica, and she's a researcher at Stanford. And she does a lot of work on epigenetics in diet specifically, and exercise and aging. These are all very interesting topics within the epigenetics field. So the cell danger response, in the end, is how our physiology operates in real time always. And the inputs are extremely important, and also the other aspects of how the manifestation of the cell danger response happens depending on those inputs is extremely important too. And it does affect epigenetics.
Yeah, I find it so, just getting back to the psychology, like the allopathic medicine model, the treatment protocol for, say, chronic fatigue syndrome, or now long COVID, all these diagnoses of exclusion, chronic Lyme disease, black mold toxicity, they all have this similar symptomology. And it sets them up, to me, like the pacing, the monitoring, it's like it reinforces a sympathetic response and makes it worse. Like, because now you're exhausted all the time. You're told to pace yourself, monitor your energy, So now you're like, oh, is that a symptom? And it's just like, it exacerbates the problem, when the problem that the thing that's preventing the healing from occurring is the oxidative stress and the inflammation that's downstream from an overactive psychology. But the allopathic medicine model is like, keep doing more of that. And so now they're like, I mean, the clients, the people that I've worked with chronic fatigue is like, they're getting better when they can't tell you 12 o'clock yesterday, I had a nap and then I had like an hour of energy. And then I got to about 4 o'clock and I need another nap. Like they're monitoring and they're logging this and, they're getting better when they're like, I can't remember what I had for lunch yesterday.
I love that. That's a beautiful way of saying it. And then one other thing I'd like to also point out here is that many people in those kinds of situations are not used to feeling what it actually feels like to be parasympathetic. And when you give them that opportunity, they freak the fuck out. And because they're not used to being in not fight or flight mode. And so it takes a lot of education. It takes a lot of handholding sometimes to bring people down to a parasympathetic state and let them know that they're safe in that state, right? And so it's something that I work with a lot of people that are involved in the psychotherapy, psychology aspect of things. I don't pretend to be one. I recommend a lot of EMDR, a lot of therapy. I recommend a lot of ketamine these days too. And I found that to be really, really helpful. I have a number of my colleagues that work with chronic complex medical illness have ketamine infusions happening in their clinics and had just been transformative to their clinical outcomes, having that as a big piece. A friend of mine in San Francisco works a lot with chronic Lyme and all the things that you mentioned earlier, Karen, that you also were diagnosed with. And since he's added ketamine in, it's been transformative overall. And you can see why, right? Ketamine gives you this absolute reset to your brain. And then you can now integrate new patterns. And Dr. Ted, who founded Home Hope, he likes to describe it as fresh powder and creating new tracks in the fresh powder with something like a ketamine infusion, with good therapy, of course. And so that's become a big component of the work that we like to really emphasize in, even if we're really focused in Home Hope on optimizing diet, lifestyle, supplementation, dialing in data. A big part of what we do is it was very involved in sort of the psychedelic renaissance in that capacity, at least in what we support and who we collaborate with in a lot of the work that we do, because I know people that have been in therapy for 30 years, right? And it's good, but it's not sometimes, what can be transformative to them.
Right. Yeah, you can keep reliving the same experience over and over again in therapy and never actually integrating or transforming it, which most of not that I want to offend anybody, but most of that model is built on them keep coming back, because that's how I have a business, is you keep coming back and we keep talking about the same stuff.
Yeah, no, that's definitely part of the challenge overall. I find it interesting in the sense that I do feel like having somebody to talk to is a good idea. For most people, I often say that everybody needs a therapist at some point. Maybe not all the time, but at least at some point. But the model is a little bit broken in that capacity. I always find that what I tell my patients all the time is that I hope you don't need me very often, but I hope that over time, if you're working on optimization strategies, which is what I'm doing, we're going to give you the tools and we're going to be doing testing every 6 months to a year to kind of see where you're at with things. But overall, you should be able to feel, hopefully intuitively over time, the things that are working well for you and the things that aren't, right? Women, as you both know, are much better at this than men. And so when I work with men, I often enlist their partners to tell them how they're doing, at least in the beginning.
Can we have your wife participating in this appointment, please?
I try to do it as much as possible. Or how does your wife think you're doing?
Right.
It's no offense to men. We just have a different psychology when it comes to this, right? We don't have the same intuition. But over time, if you can learn this, and you can, but I often teach meditation, or I recommend meditation to everybody. I recommend, walks and off of your social media and off of your devices. And like over time, all of us have these intuitive gifts, if you want to call them that, the intuitive capacity. And all of you and everybody that's listening knows, if you have children, this is obvious, right? So, and we lose it over time because of society and smartphones and everything else.
Man, you are speaking my language. It's so interesting to me. We have these signals that we're born with that are innate in us. When we're hungry, we know to eat. When we're thirsty, we know to drink. When we're restless, we know to move. When we're tired, we know to rest. but we're talked out of that same intuitive thing when society tells us
Cool.
eat 2 more bites of broccoli, but I'm not hungry anymore. Well, you're wrong.
Yes.
We're told that intuition is mistaken, and we are led away from believing that it's correct. And then somewhere in the middle of our lives, when we're sick and depressed and fat and exhausted, it's just like, and you have that fuck it moment. It's like, oh,
Yeah.
my intuition was telling me what to do, where to go all along. And I think
Yep.
that's so foundational to getting people back to health, is helping them to find a way to trust that thing they were born with again, that is just as obvious as hunger, thirst, tiredness, and restlessness. I mean, it's right there all the time, trying to tell us what to do. I love that.
Yeah.
I love your, not only, I mean this in the most flattering way. I love what a geek you are. Like like all this stuff is on the tip of your tongue. This could be a 4-hour long podcast, but you keep going back to that intuitive thing.
Yeah. I mean, so for me, my big sort of inflection point was having children, actually, because when I was 30 years old, I didn't know that you couldn't have control of everything in your life until you have a baby that doesn't stop crying for 4 months. And then it's like, what the fuck? I thought I had control of things. But then you have to become intuitive to your kids, right? Because you have to get a sense of, and of course, women are much better at this overall, but I had to be too. I had to understand, well, is the baby crying because it's hungry, or is it because it needs to get changed? Like these kinds of things, that like it becomes more intuitive, and then you watch your children grow. And if you have the capacity, which I've been blessed to find people in my life that have taught me meditation and like given me some more tools. Then I watch my kids, I observe them, like, oh, that's awesome. Like as you were talking earlier, I was a great example that I always tell my patients about. Watch your children after they have a meal. Do they sit around on a couch watching TV? No, they don't. What they do is they run around like crazy, right? They're running around the house, they're singing, they're dancing, they're playing games. Why? Because they're regulating their blood sugar, and they're doing it naturally because their bodies want to move after they eat. And so what I always tell my patients, if they have children, is like, just watch what your kids do. You should probably be doing that. So whatever that is.
Before you teach them not to do that anymore, quick.
Right.
Sit down after you eat and don't move, and whatever it might be, right?
Here's the iPad. Amuse yourself.
Right. Yeah. I mean, no, look, I will try to get my kids to eat more broccoli than they want to. I will admit to that. But I know in essence, I've learned they were my first intuitive teachers, if you want to call it that. And so bringing back, and I try to bring that into my patients, into their lives again. I'm like, this is not just about taking things and doing things. It's about feeling things and observing things, just like your children do naturally,
Yeah, that's beautiful. That's beautiful.
What was the inspiration? I might feel like I'm switching gears really quick, but you have so much to teach. And what was the inspiration for the Smarter Not Harder podcast? Was that because you had so much to teach and it wasn't enough to do it with one person at a time, or how did that come about?
The Smarter Not Harder podcast, it came out of our nonprofit organization, Health Optimization Medicine and Practice, or Home Hope for short. What we really wanted to do was educate. And we knew that the best way to educate was to bring on people that had a lot of education that they could provide. I mean, personally, of course, I'm on podcasts all the time and doing education for a lot of different things that I do and that we do. But we decided, because there's really 4 main people at the organization. There's myself, there's Dr. Ted Atracoso, Boomer Anderson, who's the CEO of both Home Hope and our for-profit Transcriptions, and a lady named Jody Duvall. She's a naturopath down in Australia. And so we wanted to create, let's call it a podcast network, where we would have roving or alternating hosts. So we'd have, sometimes it'd be Jody, sometimes it'd be me. Over the years, it's become a lot of me, and everybody else kind of fills in, because I think I have the most fun with it, honestly, because I get to bring on clinicians or practitioners that I work with oftentimes, or that I don't know enough about. Like, for example, I had a guy on named Bryce Applebaum a couple months ago, and Bryce is this vision therapist, optometrist down in DC. And I was like, I just didn't know the stuff that he was doing. And I just got so interested in the work of retraining the brain using vision and all these various aspects of it. Or Brian McKenzie, who I was mentioning earlier, who's not a doctor, but he's got an amazing framework on how to think about breath. And so the podcast really came about as a way to bring more attention to the nonprofit, no doubt about it, because we're looking to create more practitioners that want to learn how to optimize health and focus on the first standard of care for health that we've been creating. So everybody knows there's a standard of care for disease, every disease that you can imagine, but there's no standard of care for health. So could we do that by bringing more awareness, having the podcast, and bringing on guests that were aligned with our mission? And sometimes we have amazing Nobel laureate scientists on there. Sometimes we have people that are doing breath work. I just interviewed somebody today that specializes in GLP-1s. It's a very interesting topic and obviously a hot topic for everybody. And she tried to convince me that everybody needs to be on them. That's okay, right? That's a really interesting argument. And we discussed why. And so we're always trying to bring on people that bring in different perspectives. But what we always try to do on the podcast is bring it back to what we would call first principles, which is a foundational approach. How are you optimizing the self? Like, how are you optimizing the body, the vitamins, the minerals, the nutrients, the cofactors? How well are mitochondria working? It's like if you're giving GLP-1s, for example, but you're not really doing some of that other stuff, like, are you going to see the benefit overall if you're not really truly supporting the system? The answer is no, right? And so we talked about on that podcast, GLP-1s are great, but if you're just having McDonald's every day and taking GLP-1s, that's going to do nothing for you. And in fact, it's probably going to be worse for you because you're never going to be able to come off the drug. And if you ever do, you're going to get so much more weight back on you than you did before. And so the podcast really is that. It's kind of it's a container for us to talk about our nonprofit, bring people in there that are practitioners that either licensed or not licensed, that are interested in working with clients, but having a different perspective entirely. And then I get to have a lot of fun speaking to friends and colleagues, and that's been a lot of fun over the years.
Yeah, you let people be a fly on the wall of your geekery.
Indeed, yeah. I get really excited, as you can imagine and see, is like I just get so into it, and like, wait, what about this? What about that? What about this?
Oh, I get it. So, in that train of thought, like, what would your advice, or what do you tell people who get overwhelmed with how much there is to know and how much there is to learn? It's like, when I worked trauma and ICU and flight nursing, and whenever I'd get overwhelmed with the situation, like, I don't, ABCs, airway, breathing, circulation, ABCs, just go back to the basics. Is there an ABCs version of integrative medicine with all of this science and all of these things are to know, from GLPs to hyperbaric to the cell danger response and whatever? So many people want to just throw up their arms and go, oh, screw it, I'm just going to go back to the hammer nail thing. What do you tell nurses, because nurses are going to be listening to this, when they want to know more, they want to be able to educate their patients about, fully informed medical and health decisions, and overwhelmed with there's so much that I need to know and don't know? How do you advise them?
It's a great question. And I think there's a couple ways I'd like to answer it. The first way is that when I was actually asked a question, maybe about 7 or 8 years ago, and I was just kind of starting my journey with health optimization medicine at the time, and I was given 2 hours to give a 15-minute talk at a dinner event in San Francisco where I was living, and they said, you need to talk about something. Our other speaker bailed, find something to talk about, and I was like, well, what can I talk about that can be really impactful? And what I said, that my topic at the time is like, what are 3 ways that anybody can live, smarter, not harder in that way, but basically live that way for free or very close to it, like without very little money required, right? And so that's what I did. I gave 3 things that I thought everybody could do without having to spend a whole lot of money to do it. And the first one was pretty obvious. It was just connection, coming back to connect with yourself, coming back to connect with your family, taking your phones and putting them away, and really having, real intentional. This is before the pandemic, when people could only, use telemedicine or tele-Zooms and things like that and have fun with their family. But even that can be connection in certain ways. And so connection was a big one. So it's a free thing to connect with yourself. It's a free thing to connect with your family members most of the time. and loved ones. And putting away your phone is gonna actually probably save you money in the end, right? The second one was movement and trying to get people to move more, even if it's just going around the block, just getting outside. Exercise, as many of us know, is one of those what's called the cornerstone habit. As soon as we start doing something, moving at all, we want to do more. And so even with people that are super sick and can't do much, even if they take a walk around their house rather than sitting in one room, it can go a long way. And so movement is big. And the third one was kind of fun for me. And I've added more over the years, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But the third one was don't eat. And because not eating is free, right? And so and this is when the world of intermittent fasting was starting to get more play. And I have a nuanced opinion about fasting these days, as much more than I did before, but certainly most of us are overeating on a regular basis. So knowing that we don't have to eat all the time, like our body's signals for hunger are often because we just had a high glucose meal 2 hours earlier, and now we have an insulin drop and we think we need to eat again, but you probably don't, and it's going to be okay. And so the third one was fasting or intermittent fasting at that point. But it was really well received. Obviously, I've added more over the years because I met Dr. Ted, and Dr. Ted has a really nice graphic which I can share with you afterwards. And I don't remember everything in it, but it's really, the idea is that it doesn't take a lot of effort to do many of these things. And he talks about breathing well, eating well, loving well, hydrating well, grounding well, and relationships, and having good relationships, right? And those are the basics of everything, right? If you start getting fancy very quickly, sometimes you miss the boat because you're not focusing on those things. I will say, though, that in some people, getting fancy can be very helpful because it gives them reason to start doing some of the less fancy things. What I mean by that is, so for example, if you check somebody's metabolomics, which is the study of your cellular energy and production and metabolism, and you start looking at some data like organic acid testing, and we teach that in one of our modules. If you see that they're super toxic and their antioxidant levels are in the tank, and then they're vitamin mineral deficient, like, oh, you feel bad? Look what's going on here. You're toxic, right? You can't move because of all these things. And then you go, we can help you with some supplementation, but that's not going to do it. You got to change your diet. You got to change what you're doing on a day-to-day basis. So it can give people motivation, right? And so it goes both ways. Some people are self-motivating, and you can just tell them to breathe better, sleep better, eat better, and they're going to do that. But as you both know, I'm sure, and it's been my experience, you got to instill a little bit of something in them to kind of kick them in the pants. And that oftentimes for us is metabolomic testing is a big thing. And so that's what one of the primary module or the foundational module at Home Hope is called Metabolomics. And that's foundational because that is a way to study how well their cells are working in real time. The inputs, things coming from our environment, we can see what's happening. So from, things from toxic exposures to the water that you're drinking, to the cosmetics that you're taking, that you're putting on your face, to what's happening in your mitochondria and in your cells and your hormones. You can look at all that on the metabolomic level. And so for us, and this has been very transformative and different from what my father's practice is. And my dad very much is, you get on my train, this is what we're going to do, or you don't. And that's okay. Like, he'll give people the tools, but he's not looking at data as much. At least he wasn't initially. Now he's doing more of that. But for this framework, it's a data-focused approach to help motivate people to do the other things too.
And there's a very powerful role for intuition in what you just talked about. I love how you said, the getting fancy, you have to be intuitive about the person, the individual that's in front of you, because sometimes doing one of those tests is going to make them more hypervigilant. Oh my gosh, there's so much more about me to fix. And then you're going to get them all ranked up in the sympathetic thing. And then there's people that'll see that and go, oh, and it's okay. There's a science behind, and there's something I can do about it. And it actually serves. So knowing how, using your intuition to know what's going to be best for that individual, even with all the fancy stuff and all the basic stuff, knowing where to go first. That's really important. I love that.
I would always love to start with the basic stuff first if I can.
Yeah.
But I find that maybe it's about half of people, maybe less than that. Maybe let's say more like 20% of people can really just take something and roll with it without having something to have a foundation that it lays under.
Yeah.
And so that's what home hope really is, I feel. It doesn't take the place of functional medicine even. It doesn't take the place of absolutely conventional medicine. Functional medicine is more focused on finding the root causes of your illness, of your disease. And that's important, but it can still sometimes miss the foundational things that are important from a cellular perspective, of course, and also from, a diet, lifestyle, behavior perspective too. So if you're just looking for your Lyme, as you probably had this experience, Karen, it's like, well, I just want to treat my Lyme. I just want to treat my Lyme. I just want to treat my Lyme. It's like, no, did you know that most people have Lyme on some level? Right?
I was just going to say, if you test my blood, I got Babesia, I got Bartonella, I got whatever. It's all in there, but that wasn't the problem. That's just when I was having all my symptoms, whatever the doctor tests for to try to explain your symptoms, that's what they're going to call it. But it was never that in the first place. It was this the whole time.
Yeah, we have a shift in perspective. So we talked about a shift in from longevity to health span, or rejuvenity as we call it. The other one we do is something called a shift in organology. So from organ-based care to what's called Holo-Bio Ontology. Have you heard of the Holo-Bio before?
That sounds fancy. Okay. No, say that slow again. Holo-Bio.
Holo-Bio, so Holobiont, Holo-Bio. And the Holo-Bio is a concept that's been around for a while, but it's very simple if you think about it. We are not just made up of human cells, right? We are made up of lots of different things: bacteria, fungus, virus, and human cells. So we are a population of cells within an ecosystem that is this meat suit, as we were referring to before. We have an aura of this stuff around us. There's electricity around us, right? All these things are playing, but my ecosystem, or this ecosystem, if you want to call it mind, it's not really mine, right? It's this, right? This ecosystem is very different from your ecosystem or anybody else's ecosystem. So we want to individualize our care and our approach to that holobiont perspective. So instead of focusing on the liver or the heart, we focus on the cell. The cell is the universal common denominator for all of our human tissue and all of our bacteria, fungus, and virus and everything else that's happening, because we can see components of that in our cells themselves. We know that bacteria in our gut talk to our mitochondria in our regular cells. And we have bacteria that talk to fungus and fungus that talk to virus, and it's called interkingdom crosstalk. So all these cool words, right? And so everybody's talking to each other. All these cells are talking, and we can see evidence of this in the cells when we test metabolomics. And so we are shifting that perspective from the organs, which is mostly functional medicine, obviously conventional medicine, to the cells. And there's nobody else taking care of your basic cell really out there. And that's kind of what we're doing. And that's why I feel, of course, I'm biased here, but I really do feel that we're kind of the bottom of the pyramid, the foundation for everything else above it. Because if you don't have cells that are working well, nothing else is going to work very well. It's just you just can't optimize your brain to think better if you're not also optimizing the physiology and the cellular ecosystem of your brain so that your cells can do that, right? And so it all comes back to that foundation.
That's cool.
Fancy words, but it all kind of gives the concepts are really kind of basic overall.
Yeah.
No, it's top down, bottom up, inside out. If you don't have the neurotransmitters, the happy hormones associated with the parasympathetic nervous system, like the levees that keep all the other stuff from getting over, then, which are created in your gut. If your gut's not working, your brain's not working. If your brain's not working, it affects the gut. I mean, that's why I've always hated the term mind-body connection, because the connection part insinuates that there's two separate things. They're not. It's just all one interkingdom. I love that.
Yeah. It's all one big holobiont. It's what it is. It's one big ecosystem together. And that's what we try to emphasize in our training, is that when you're looking and working with people, you're working with them in that context. You're not, look, I'm an internal medicine doctor. I've worked in hospitals for years. I know all the crazy things that can happen. And can I help address those? Sure, if I need to. But the goal really is to make those things less prevalent, happening less, because you're optimizing that foundation. And so we don't make any claims at Home Hope. We don't make any claims that we're going to reverse your diabetes or make your Lyme disease go into remission or whatever those things are. No, we're optimizing your Holo-Bio, your cellular architecture, your cellular foundation, and then from there, everything is going to get easier and better because that's just the nature of how the body works.
Sure.
I love that. Can you, Wendy? I'm sorry, I keep jumping in. Can you talk about some? Well, first of all, I have two questions. One is I want to know who your training is for. Who is mostly, coming to that? Is that available to nurses, doctors, everybody, like even lay people, or just a certain thing? And the second thing I want to know is, we'll answer that first. Well, spoiler alert. The other thing I want to know is some wins, some like when somebody came to you and the simple things you did that totally made everything different from one day to the next for them.
Sure. So the training is available to anybody that wishes to take it. Now, what I will say about that is that mostly we have people that have advanced degrees, RNs, PAs, NPs, MDs. Right now, we're doing a cohort style. So our first module called Metabolomics, we do a cohort style about 3 times a year where we have anywhere between 10 and 20 students. We meet once a week in a small group in a Zoom session, and we go through the lesson of the week. And it's a 12-week module. Right now, we have 2 dermatologists, an infectious disease expert, a family doctor, who else? A PhD in neuroscience, we have a health coach, a healthcare practitioner, a registered dietitian. Thinking who else we have? We have another RN. Actually, we have an RN right now that runs a facility in just outside of Durango in Colorado that does IV therapy, but was tired of people coming in for IVs, knowing that they could be doing so much more, right? And the same thing with dermatologists. These dermatologists, people care about their skin, so they come in for skin issues, but they know, a lot of these dermatologists know that there's much more that they could be doing for these patients so their skin gets better because they need to optimize their gut, for example, or whatever it might be along the way. So and then we have some people that are pure health coaches, people that are very motivated, that are really seeing people without, in the setting of having a license per se. But we have some phenomenal ones that are really, they're upstarts. They're people that are involved in biochemistry. This is not a course that's trying to scrimp on the biochemistry, the biophysiology. We talk about the citric acid cycle. We talk about mitochondrial optimization, antioxidants, and we talk about various aspects of our physiology that require, proteins, amino acids, heavy metals, minerals, and how all these things work together. So it's not light on the science, but it's not also light on clinical application. Like everything that we do is focused on how can you help somebody right now that's in front of you with the testing that you're getting on somebody. So it's not theoretical. Like I didn't want to get involved in something that was purely theory or very much only or mostly theory. I'm a clinician. I want to see what I can do for people right now. And I don't want to have to just, editorialize or do mental masturbation about a topic. So that would be it's a full breadth of people that are taking the course overall. And we have RNs that are now taking it and that are continue to take it as well. We also have CME or continuing medical education credits for all the modules that we offer. So for example, Metabolomics has 45 CME credits available. So, and those are usually accredited also for nurses to get those as well. And so all of our modules have at least 30 to 45 CME credits. So you're not only learning it, but you're also getting those CME credits that are available for you for your nursing licenses and things like that. Do you have any questions about that before I go to stories? Or?
Nope, that was perfect.
Okay.
It's actually what should have come at the end. Like, how do people contact you and all that stuff? But that was good.
No, it's all good. I can come back to it too, but I think it's nice to kind of hear some of the people that are actually going through the course right now. I always find it interesting and intriguing when we have sort of patterns. The pattern right now is dermatology for whatever reason. Like we have a number of dermatologists that have been taking the course recently, and I think it's because of what I just said, right? These people are coming in for skin cream or
Accutane
or something like that. Right? And then, well, wait, that's not really getting to the root, what's going on foundationally, right? And so, but lots of different stories over the years. I've been really doing this in my own clinical practice since 2019. I've worked with a huge variety of patients over the years, anybody from people with stage 4 cancer to people that are high-end athletes to young kids. I just work with anybody over 18, and very old people as well. The one story that's kind of coming out to me right now is so I was working with his dad, very nice guy, a friend of mine, and he referred me to his son, who was, I think at the time, about 20 years old, and he was a professional gamer. So he played games for a living, which means that he was in a chair for 18 hours a day.
Yeah.
Do you know how many times a week he was pooping?
Yeah, once.
One time a week.
Oh my gosh.
One time a week, right? And so he was sitting in a chair. And so the beautiful thing about younger people, right, is that you can do very small little things oftentimes and see these huge changes, right? So he wasn't the type of kid that was just going to do what I asked him to do. I'm like, well, can't you just get up every hour for 10 minutes and just walk? He's like, I'm not going to do it. I'm like, okay, all right. So, but we did some testing. We have one module that's fully focused on the gut immune system, gut microbiota, and understanding how to test for it, how to correct various aspects of that. And so we saw that his, gut microbiota was, all kinds of messed up, right? And I said, look, all I want you to do is do a couple things. I want to change your diet just a little bit. Just take out dairy, because he also looked like he was sensitive to dairy. Like, take out dairy, and I just want you to take a couple of probiotics for me. And like within a month, he was having bowel movements every day. His energy was so much better. I put him on very minimal supplementation overall. It was more just, you see what's going on here, right?
Yeah.
If you want to feel better, if you want to game better, in his case, right?
Smart.
Yeah.
If you poop more, you're going to feel better. Like, people know that are constipated, it doesn't feel very good. Like, nobody likes to be full of shit, right? And so
Poop to up your gaming game.
Exactly, right? So you have to throw it into the pattern for him, where this is going to make you better. Now, like 3 months, maybe 6 months later, the dude is getting up every day. He's not sitting in his chair. He's playing less, but he's playing better the times that he's playing, right? His energy is better. His parents are overjoyed that he's not just sitting in the back room anymore, and he's actually around more. Yeah. And so that was a really great it happened a while ago now, maybe like 3 or 4 years ago. But I remember that really well, because it was really just a couple small things that made a big, big difference in him over time. I've also worked with a number of people over many years. I've been working with a lady with long COVID for many years. And it's taken a long time. It's not something that happened overnight, but step by step, it's taken us a couple years. But from when she was taking ibuprofen, 800 milligrams every 6 to 8 hours because of pain and then taking medication to help her sleep at night, but she couldn't sleep, to being on natural things for pain, natural things for sleep, optimizing her energy so she can actually go and do things on a regular basis. So, it's been really beautiful to see. But it took a lot of work for her. It wasn't like the next day she was feeling better. No, it took time. It took effort on her end, but by giving her the tools and her being motivated to see the improvements, she has seen, qualitative improvements, but she's had downturns along the way. She had a gastroenteritis, like severe neuro, about 2 months ago, and she's taken a big hit from that. And it's taken some time for her to rebuild from there. And I'm still working on that with her. So it's not like, as I was alluding to earlier, it's a process, right? And there's going to be times where things go down and they're harder to build back up from. But if you have a more solid foundation, like if that had happened to her 2 or 3 years ago, she'd have been down for months. Like now in a month, she's almost back to her baseline, right? And so that's good news. And so those are two stories that come to mind.
And hopefully she sees that too. She recognizes that.
100%. Yeah. Yeah. And her husband does too. And her husband, it's actually, interestingly, it's the opposite in that relationship, where the husband tends to see more of his wife's, my patient, that her benefits of seeing things rather than she has sometimes, And so it's, when you're in the sick role for a long time, it's sometimes hard to see that. Right. And so sometimes it's your partner, family friend, that is really able to show you, like, look, you are doing better. Right. And so I point these things out. Right. I have one more good story actually, and it's actually a failure on my side. But I knew this very quickly. Is that this is somebody that came to me, money's no option, just wants to get better, right? However, 4 or 5 people died in his family within about 6 months. He had severe weightlifting issues where he had major injuries related to that. He tried everything under the sun to get better. Not better yet, right? And so, I started working with him. We did some testing, and I was like, and I very quickly realized I kind of knew this in the beginning, but against my better judgment in this case, actually, I said, let's do some additional testing. Let's kind of see where you are, because he's very, really wanted to do it. Like, okay, it's been a while since you've done this stuff. Let's see where you are. He hasn't gotten better, even though we've tried different supplementation, different diets. And so what I've been emphasizing to him over the last 6 months or a year now is that, actually it's been about 6 months, no more testing. Not doing any of this until you start working on the psychoneurophysiology of all this, right? And so now I'm getting more interested in breath work and in qigong, and we're talking about things like ketamine, right? And it's a process for him, and I totally understand that. But I figured it out. Against my better judgment, I still went through the testing initially with him, but I also felt on some level, I'm like, well, let's show him that very likely that what we're going to do here is not going to get him to where he wants to go. Right. And so again, that was some more evidence for him that he needed to think outside of, and that's what we've been doing over the last several months is really focusing on that aspect of things, focusing on, if you want to get to where you want to be, doing the same thing over and over again is not going to get you there.
Yeah. Well, it's not a failure. It's just being willing to continue to look at, we went down one pathway, we got to reverse and go down another one. And with somebody like you willing to go there with them, there's no failure there to me.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I think in retrospect, as I think about it, as I haven't really kind of said this out loud because it's relatively new, is that it was more that I knew he wasn't ready for the conversation initially.
Yes.
I knew he wasn't ready to have that conversation. He wasn't prepared to go that route. And then it wasn't entirely obvious to me that we couldn't get there by doing some physiological stuff. But it's evolved over time, right? And I think a part of this, and it's an interesting part of the world that we live in now, is that I was having a conversation like I'm having a conversation with you both on Zoom. And you do miss something there, right? Yes. As clinicians, we miss something. And so I don't always, when you're with somebody like in the flesh, it's much easier overall. And so my sense of it with him is if I was in the flesh with the guy, I would have known instantaneously, right? But it took me some more time because he had created compensatory ways of approaching his health that threw me off a little bit in the beginning, right? But I also had a sense that he wasn't ready to go there too. So, a little bit of, this is like the nuance, the art of it all, right? It's all very interesting and always learning.
Yes.
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
Oh my gosh, that was already over. It was an hour and 10 minutes. I could just sit here and, it's cotton candy for my brain, Dr. Scott.
Well, we will do some spoiler alerts because probably a good way to end is the Smarter Not Harder podcast is coming to the RNegade library. So we're pretty psyched about that. And so that'll be coming. I think we have you on schedule for May to start our episodes. And we're even talking to you about some of your courses. So yeah, I think nurses who are listening, we've got a much deeper relationship coming with Dr. Scott and the team that he works with. So we're pretty excited.
Yeah, this is like the perfect entry because you went around the houses with so many different things. You went, you have demonstrated your breadth and your depth that you could go into many different topics. And it was very juicy and a great introduction to you. So thank you so much for your time.
Yeah.
That was pretty juicy, huh?
Yeah, it was really juicy. And I had to keep doing this because I'm like, if I open my mouth about that, we're never going to go there.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I get it from my team that once I start getting going, it's funny because when I record podcasts with guests, I'm in like 5 or 10 minutes in, I'm like, I don't know what I'm going to talk about. I think I'm done. And then by the time it's like an hour and a half in, I'm like, holy shit, I got to stop.
No, you have so many threads that I wanted to pull and some that I even didn't. So yeah, that's great.
Well, there's always the opportunity for more, right? Like we could we can dive into some deep topics. That will be great, Karen. So
Yeah, your patients are lucky to have you. We are lucky to have you, and it was a joy to meet you and have this just the beginning.
It's my pleasure to be here. It's my pleasure to be part of your network. I love nurses. I am so appreciative and grateful for all the nurses that helped me, especially in the beginning of my career when I didn't know what the fuck I was doing. And I could just ask the house nurse, the charge nurse, tell me what to do. Please tell me what to do.
Yeah, if you doubt your own intuition, follow theirs.
I have such a healthy respect for nurses. They're truly the ones that take care of patients in the hospital. I was just the fly that would be there for 2 to 5 minutes and then run away to see somebody else. And so I have a huge respect, and I'm very excited to be on the platform. I really hope that our podcast can give a lot of value to those that are listening. We go through a lot of different, really, really novel topics, some that are very topical in the sense of a lot of people are talking about them now, like GLP-1s. We have a lot of novel topics that I think will be interesting to many of you that are listening. So thank you for the opportunity.
Oh yeah, this was a perfect introduction. I mean, the breadth and the depth, it's a good taster.
Renegades.